Hi there, and welcome to another interview, which is slightly different to what I normally do. And we're going to talk about something very fundamental, which is taken for granted, I think, and that's light and water, and maybe a few other things. I'm going to discuss it today with Sara Pugh. Hi, Sara.
Oh, hi. How is it? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's nice to actually meet you. I've watched a lot of your content, and we nearly met each other at the War on Health conference. But I'm going to get straight to the nitty gritty because one of the things I think is underrated and right under everyone's noses, but we seem to not really talk about it, and that's things like light and water. So I just want to really get into something you're particularly passionate about, which is water. So why are you so passionate about water?
Because I'm very much into things that are very simple on the surface, but deeply complex underneath. And with water, even though we just take it for granted as water in a glass, the actual physics behind how water works and the intricacy of the molecule, that it can be ice, steam, gel water, and it basically can conduct electricity. It's a dipole because it's a magnet, if you think about the structure of it. And with all those components, it just provides like the perfect medium for communication within an organism or in biology. So it can carry energy and it can carry information. And that's basically what everything boils down to, is energy and information. And water makes the perfect medium inside a living organism. And then we've got other mediums like the ether and such like on the outside. And I also think that there's lots of water nonsense around about people selling snake oil water, and this idea that you can drink something and fix everything, I really don't think is true at all, because a lot of people don't understand that we make water ourselves in our mitochondria. And the better our mitochondria can make water, which is deuterium depleted, the more energy we'll have and the better we function. And just I like to bring things down to sort of simple terms and concepts so that everybody can understand. But really, the reason a lot of people avoid talking about water is, like I said, it's so complicated. Like the work of Dr. Gilbert Ling is sort of, even I wouldn't be able to understand his work, but it was that important that NMR machines, which do look at the behavior of water and hydrogen in organisms, was based on his work. So if he was wrong, we wouldn't have NMR machines and all of the other kind of imaging that had come along from that.
Yeah, now you mentioned a few things there. It carries energy and information. I've heard you mention that the body is like it has a water battery. So could you sort of explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, because with biology, everything has to be coated with water anyway. So when I worked in the lab, we did our experiments sort of in something wet, but you can do experiments where you take biology out of its natural environment and try and crystallize proteins, and they're not wet anymore. So first of all, everything in the body is coated with water to hydrate, so it can't work unless it's wet. And then if we look deeper into the body, as in the fourth phase of water, which a lot of people aren't familiar with because we're not taught about it in school, that actually can charge separate into positive and negative, which means electrons are now free to move. And when we have electrons that can move, that creates an electric field, or it's a potential to have power. If we look into sort of very basic things like Dr. Pollock's work about how do we expand this exclusion zone, by accident, one of his researchers discovered that red light expands this exclusion zone. So it makes a larger amount of, say, we'll just say gel water that's got the capacity to hold light, which again is energy and information, but also the electrons are able to move. But also we have things like proton wires in the body. And like I said at the beginning, water sort of acts as a semiconductor. So we've got the ability for charge to be stored, which is a battery, and also charge or electrons to move. So it's sort of like the water battery in simple terms is what Gilbert Ling's work's all about, that he showed that it's impossible that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which in all textbooks is our universal energy currency, that's wrong by about a factor of 500 or maybe even more now because it's been repeated. So something else in the body had to be our battery. So that's kind of in simple terms what our water battery is. So it's something which grounding, standing on the earth and drawing electrons in, that can help sort of add charge to this battery. If we're near too much technology, you can even do it yourself, because you can kind of make, you can set up sort of things where you'd use sort of plastic and water, and you can see things moving. I won't go into detail here, that when you put your phone by it, everything stops because it collapses the easy. And then going out in the sun or getting sunlight, that basically charges up our battery. But most people hopefully know that the sun is sort of not only the thing which provides us with a 60% of our energy, because we only get 30% from food, but it also is the thing which makes the food in the first place by photosynthesis. So once you sort of get into the weeds, you can kind of simplify things and say to people, actually, the sun made the food, but it also, along with grounding, provides us with an additional, or the majority of our energy source, and it's not all just coming from the protons and electrons in food.
Yeah, and I agree with you, bring it back to basics as well, because if you go to the seaside, you feel better. If you're outside, you feel better. If you're in water or near water, most people feel better. You mentioned the phone, actually. I do a lot of rehab. I've been doing rehab for about 15 years, and these suck your energy absolutely, definitely. You can even demonstrate this, because you can get somebody to who's having problems with their arm, moving their arm, improve it in rehab. And then when you ask them to put their phone on their chest and do the same movement, they can't do the same range of motion. And
absolutely. Yeah, with kinesiology, it's brilliant to test. Like, some people use a pendulum, some people just use kinesiology, and you can find all different things that resonate or don't resonate with your own frequency. But also, because you mentioned putting it by the heart, that's a really interesting organ that isn't a pump, but it also is a gigantic magnet. So straight away, you've basically collapsed your biofield, which is a great big toroidal or torus wave. So it wouldn't surprise me that it's not just muscle testing. If you did a cognitive test, like there's lots of them you can do, people would probably have slower reaction speeds, perform worse cognitively if you did that. So I really, that's a great sort of way you can just show people, keep the devices away from important bits in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned school earlier. You talk about what you're taught at the school. I mean, I'm 60 next week, and
I thought you were about 40. You look great.
All right, thanks. Well, I use a lot of light therapy and stuff like that. I practice what I preach, but I can remember at school asking. See, the thing is, the reason I like you is because you question stuff. You don't accept the status quo. Even at 14, I can remember when they were talking about water on the planet and saying how much water there is. I put my hand up and said, "Where did it come from? Where's all this water come from?" And the teacher said with absolute confidence, it came from comets, which of course we now know isn't true. And that's what I want people to tap into. All the things they've been told in the past, which are categoric, have been proven to be wrong. So when we're talking about something that's new to you, don't immediately shut it down, because this fourth phase of water, which you mentioned, so you've got vapor, and you've got obviously liquid water, and you've got the exclusion zone that you mentioned, and ice, is really important. And I think one of the things that I definitely like about you is you talk about things that then there is a practical element to it. So, for instance, macular degeneration. In Europe and in Latin America, red light therapy is actually approved. And there are studies showing that the drusen, the protein at the back of the eye, does actually reduce with red light therapy. And yet when you talk about red light therapy, people think it's woo-woo, but there it is in a medical setting. So we need to be open to everything you're saying, I think.
When I just revisit the macular degeneration, because I'm very much about, rather than trying to fix something, find out what broke it in the first place. And blue light is the best way to totally destroy your retinol and make it turn really nasty in the body. And it's complete nonsense about vitamin A toxicity and copper toxicity. And that's the best way to really destroy and damage your photoreceptors. And also, it's going to disrupt the DHA and the retinol in your eye. So I would say that the best way to prevent macular degeneration is to be more vigilant with screen use and take the blue light toxicity seriously. Because you mentioned energy earlier, and the phone is going to steal all your dopamine as well. So people who struggle with food issues, if you're letting the phone steal all your dopamine, you're just going to be straight in the cake cupboard or whatever. And I'm sure you deal with a lot of that. But I also think it's actually a very serious thing. And there's loads of studies, actually. I read ages ago that screens and smoking are the worst for macular degeneration. So that's the thing. The data's all there anyway. And then you can just go out at sunrise and sunset to fix your eyes, because again, just buying electronics, people can really hurt themselves with them. Whereas if you go out at sunrise and sunset, it's really safe for everybody to do healing, and you can take babies out with you. You know, it doesn't matter if you've had surgery or whatever, you're not shining really bright LEDs in your face, because that can really, this is what I'm also all about, that people shouldn't just take a little bit of information and then invent their own version, because that's how people invent weird keto and carnivore diets. And then, as I like to say, the idiots spoil it for everybody else, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Oh, and I'm sure in the carnivore, with the food space, I've had so many people just telling me I'm doing carnivore or keto, and I've looked at the food diet and just thought, what's that? No wonder there's all kinds of things going against it, because it's not what anybody's advised you to do as well. So I definitely just wanted to jump in there just so that people knew you can prevent something with get rid of the blue light, and then if you've broken something, you can get the red light in many, many different ways. And you're completely correct, it can repair it. I've just had so many clients do really stupid things with red lights. I just had to say that there to disclaim us from that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You have to use the proper equipment. You can't just stare at a red bulb. I mean, that thing is proper therapeutic equipment. Just broader then, what about red light therapy? Do you think that's something good? And if you do, why is it good?
First of all, for red light therapy, in terms of the way light is, in the visible spectrum, we've got and the UV and the near infrared, there's something like 10 to the 32 different wavelengths. So that's like quadrillions and like trillions and trillions of individual possibilities or signals, whereas a red light LED or panel is usually 4 out of that, or 2. So you've basically taken the gigantic electromagnetic light spectrum of visible and non-visible light and picked out 2 wavelengths and then made an extremely strong LED, and then you're shining that on yourself. So it's sort of like with Tina Caru's work. Yes, light is a drug. So that means we have to be kind of really careful how we approach using these panels, because you're working with single wavelength light. And I'm very much for just the everyday person being able to heal themselves. And the sun makes red light 24/7, the near infrared, that's the very healing one. So you can go out any time and get red light therapy for free. And you don't need to worry about, is there a flicker rate? Should I shine this in my face? How long should I do it for? But I'm not adverse to red light therapy. I just wouldn't put it anywhere near my eyes, because it can penetrate quite deeply, and they're much more powerful than people realize. However, I think it can be really, really useful in the UK when we have persistent weeks of lack of light. And I think the key thing about red light therapy, and this applies the same as supplements or anything, people always ask me about this, you have to make sure you've got a good quality, whatever the thing is, to start with. Because if you just buy some random red light panel from China, goodness knows what it's going to do. And also, like everything, there are specific protocols, and more isn't better. And that's this other aspect. People have this idea, oh yeah, red light's good, blue's bad. Therefore, if I just bathe myself in red light all day, I'll feel amazing. But you have also the laws of diminishing returns. So personally, for me, I don't really do more than about 2 to 5 minutes a day, and I don't let it go in my face. But I've had lots of people had really good results with his skin healing, joint problems, and things like that. But I would just say it's just a useful tool. But no matter what, the sun's red light's always better, because it's the full spectrum, the whole of this giant keyboard of information, all at the right frequency at exactly the right time of day. Whereas with the red light, you're picking it out. And how do we know we've got the right ones? And the other thing that people do is they try and use red light panels when it's dark, so when the sun's gone. So you can really mess up your melatonin and your sleep doing red light therapy in the evening, because there wouldn't naturally be red light at that time.
Yeah, and the circadian rhythms are so important. I think actually going with the seasons and going with the sunrise and the sunset is something, like you say, it's free, and it's so easy to get outside, and it's so obvious it's one of the best things to do. I just wanted to go through all the sort of common things that people ask me about this.
Yeah.
As you know ever such a lot about the water side of things, what are your views on hydrogen water?
I think it's okay if you buy something that's the actual correct device. So I've been in lots of rabbit holes with this, and Greg, the hydrogen man, has been really helpful because all he wants to do is look at water and hydrogen. So he has read all of the studies because of his own sort of health issues. So we go and look things up and we try stuff out. So I would say with hydrogen water, you need to use like the Lord's Hydrofix, because that's actually what's licensed for doing hydrogen therapy outside of the UK and the US. So in Japan, it's like a licensed therapy. So you actually need something that's going to make clean hydrogen, because if you use the wrong machines, you can end up, if you're going to inhale, because that's kind of the best way, you're going to be inhaling other contaminants. The other thing about the Lord's Hydrofix, you need the hydrogen to be at the right concentration, whereas these little bottles that people buy in Kangen water, the way in which the water is electrocuted and split, that creates sort of unwanted products, but also the amount of hydrogen in these isn't going to be strong enough anyway. The tablets, this is like an area of debate. I think they're okay in very short-term use, say if somebody was visiting a relative in hospital or traveling, but then again, they were manufactured somewhere and some of them can be contaminated with heavy metals, because anything that's made in a factory, there's sort of moving parts and you don't know exactly what's going on. And you need to actually take probably 5 or 6 tablets in the water to make the most concentrated hydrogen water. So that means the tablets over time would get very expensive anyway. So it's like everything. The hydrogen's a really interesting molecule because it's like an electron. It's an antioxidant and it's really small like an electron. So that means it can get past all of these hydration shells we were talking about and get into cells, whereas big molecules like vitamin C or resveratrol or all these other lists of things which people take as a supplement, they're too big. They can't get through the exclusion zone water because they're too big. Whereas hydrogen and electrons can travel through the water and get to where they're needed. And then they are themselves an antioxidant, because if we just go back to school again, we had that equation oil rig, which is oxidation is loss and reduction is gain. And that's, can be reversed for hydrogen. So hydrogen and electrons, they themselves are a reducing agent, which means they are an antioxidant. So again, the hydrogen, how it works is slightly different to an electron, but it is still something really important because the gut microbiome makes hydrogen as well. So that's why some people find hydrogen water better than others, because there was something wrong with their gut microbiome, maybe eating too much sugar, too much processed food, glyphosate laden food that would harm or kill off the hydrogen making bacteria and disturb everything in the gut. So yes, I would say it's one of those things. There's definite science behind it, like about 2,000 papers, but then you have to make sure, like everything you buy, the right machine to make the hydrogen water, or just don't bother at all. And if you're not a kind of machine person or don't like stuff like that, you can have a good gut microbiome that's going to make you a litre of hydrogen per day anyway. So it's like everything. There's a free way and then there's a paid way.
So what is the difference between hydrogen water and, say, deuterium depleted water? Or are we talking the same thing?
Oh, no. So deuterium is like an isotope of hydrogen. So people would know it as heavy hydrogen because in the nucleus it's got a neutron as well. So it's a different shape. It's twice the mass. It's got a different dielectric constant. So it means in our water battery, it's not so good at holding charge. It's a bit like an old iPhone battery that the phone keeps going flat. And it's also got a different magnetic moment. So even though it's still a hydrogen, it's like instead of being a brother, it's like a distant cousin of hydrogen. So with deuterium in the body, because if it gets into the mitochondria, it can damage the ATPase. So because hydrogens are meant to go down that to turn it along with water to make ATP, but also hydrogen is really important in our water battery. And like I just said, if you've got deuterium in there, it's like the iPhone battery when you've plugged your iPhone in and accidentally left it overnight loads of times and the battery just doesn't charge properly. And also deuterium can get into like things like dopamine or a sex hormone where a hydrogen should be. And it basically just slows things down because the body doesn't recognize it anymore. And then for people who are kind of really into the like deep biology, the Deuterium can also block up the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle. So that's the thing which feeds electrons and protons into the mitochondria. So ideally, we don't want loads of deuterium in the important parts of our biological machinery. However, it is okay where it's supposed to be, like in the blood. There's more deuterium there because it does other things. It can help stabilize some of the water. And it also is supposed to go into collagen because it can actually help stabilize our collagen networks. So it doesn't mean more deuterium in collagen is good. It's just, it's supposed to go in there. And that's what it has a biological role for. It is also important as a growth factor for small organisms like flies and bacteria. So deuterium depleted water just means water that somebody quite painfully by lots of processes has made sure that most of the water is just hydrogen. Like the whole planet and say ocean, there's 155 parts per million of deuterium in there. And it sounds like hardly anything at all, but that little tiny amount is still quite a lot. Whereas if you buy deuterium depleted water, you can buy water that's 5 ppm or 25 ppm. So it just means that the fraction of deuterium in there is really tiny. So you don't have as much of this isotope of hydrogen that's only a problem if it accumulates. And then bearing in mind, again, just to cater for the people who don't want to sort of invest anything, if you eat, say, a keto diet or avoid high deuterium foods like fruit out of season, sugar, processed food and stuff like that, your mitochondria will make deuterium depleted water for you because it's got lots of steps. Like in the TCA or Krebs cycle, it's like a checkpoint to stop the deuterium getting in the first place. Although there are some people who ask about deuterium depleted water, and I think it's fine as long as people also implement lifestyle changes as well, so they can get their money's worth out of the deuterium depleted water. And for some people who are trying really hard, but they've just lived a really bad sort of lifestyle and they really want to do a change and they're just full of deuterium and they're really stuck, the deuterium depleted water can help sort of shove some of the deuterium out, so then their bodies can like do the rest themselves and they get results. And as you know, being a coach, it kind of motivates them. And then it's licensed as an anti-cancer therapy for animals in Europe. So again, if somebody's got cancer and is looking for something, or what can I take now that's got studies behind it that I can buy and I'm not going to hurt myself more, I would go straight for the deuterium depleted water and look up Dr. Gabor Chomely, because he spent 30 years of his life studying cancer and deuterium, and he's got protocols and things like that. So that's probably like the whirlwind tour of deuterium depleted water.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, there are even indices for grass-fed beef. I think it's about 115 parts per million, and feedlot or grain-fed beef is something like 120 parts per million, and I think grains is something like 150 parts per million. So it is an interesting subject, and I think it's, going back to what I said, light and water is around us and we take it for granted. But actually, you've just talked about 2 different types of water and the huge effects of having too much deuterium, not the right amount, however you want to word it, can make such a big difference. So,
yeah, I'd definitely say it's like deuterium overload. And I just want to add in for people listening that seed oils have got something like 200 parts per million of deuterium. And then certain kind of collagen supplements can be actually over 300, because we talk to Dr. Borosh quite a lot and ask him things. And he sort of is a proponent of a grass-fed based animal way of eating with a keto diet for lowering deuterium. And he goes to that first, other than the water. So again, it's just like reinforcing for people listening, because some people try and keep saying, oh, what's wrong with seed oils? And it's like, well, there's multiple ways we can look at it, but the deuterium content is through the roof. So it's just an additional kind of, because it takes time to sort of build arguments or scientific defense against all of these people who try to tell us that plant oils are heart healthy, back to what you were saying in the beginning about how we get brainwashed. And we could probably talk all day about that. So definitely the seed oils are a big sort of contributor of deuterium in the diet, along with eating carbs out of season.
Yes, I think it's interesting that you add out of season, because I'm a big person into that, and I've gone down the rabbit hole of haplotypes and everything. You know, what's where we were born, where our ancestors were born. But bringing it back down to sort of real world examples, a lot of people think that it's strange when people say you need early morning sunlight in your eyes, and I always say it's not talking about staring at the sun; it's just being out and light entering the eye. I wondered if you had any views on dry eyes, which is a thing that happens for a lot of people. Now, you know, you've got dry, so there's maybe not enough water in there or not enough fluid. Do you think there's any link between people being indoors and dry eyes?
Oh, massively, because I think it's like for the very early sort of water pioneers, people like Dr. Batmangeli, who's got lots of studies, and he wrote everything in his books in very simple layman terms. That again, the dry eyes, there are different reasons, but again, if we think about it, a tear is sort of carrying information, and if we don't have enough exclusion zone water, your body's going to prioritize it. And I think with dry eyes, I would just have to, again, look at the person and all of their background in more detail. And I'll probably be able to find it, because it could be several other things for dry eyes. But definitely I would always go for the light and the water first, because, again, we need red light, again, like sunrise light, to power our water battery, set our body clocks. And bear in mind the tear ducts are going to have a clock in them as well. So if they're out of sync, they're not going to work properly. So I'd probably just say with the dry eyes thing, again, it could be something to do with retinol, because people are sort of terrified of that, of vitamin A, yet it's like we can't function properly without it. So I think there's lots of quantum approaches, but I would just look straight away at sort of excessive tech use, stealing the water, body clocks out of sync by not seeing the sunrise, the UV rise, and a lack of exclusion zone water. I mean, minerals are important as well in this, of course, and also grounding, because if a human can't conduct electricity very well, they can't sort of hold their minerals in and hold charge. So it could be a lack of connection with the ground, and just too much sort of isolation, shoes, living high up and such like. Because I just find with a lot of things, there's no such thing as a particular, you know, disease. When you fix the person's terrain, the symptoms of whatever it is, obesity or itching or a rash or imbalanced hormones or some kind of autoimmune response or whatever, the thing seems to go away because the person improved their environment. So I'm kind of always a bit cautious about offering sort of suggestions when people tell me I've got this or I've got that disease or I've got this condition, because you're then identifying with that and taking ownership. And if you're kind of a bit more like, let's just make my internal and external environment better, and see if these things that are of the body complaining about something just go away by themselves.
Yeah, and I think it is really basic, isn't it? Getting out in the morning, getting outside, letting let the sunlight heat your skin, seeing the sunset. It's all really simple. And I think that's I like to go back to common sense. Sunlight and water are two of the most basic things in the world, and we seem to be trying to lock ourselves away from it, and, you know, wear too many clothes and shoes and stay indoors and insulate ourselves from everything, which to me just seems fundamentally flawed as a way of living. For those that don't really understand the words exclusion zone water, have you got a sort of layman's way to explain exactly what that means?
Oh, yeah. So if we think about the bulk water, so that doesn't have a charge. That's just water molecules randomly moving about in a glass. When water comes in contact with a hydrophilic surface, so in simple language, that can be the inside of a blood vessel or the outside of a cell, the water separates into positive and negative charges, and it produces an exclusion zone. So this is like the gel water, and it's like none can pass. So nothing can go through the exclusion zone other than very small things, like I think potassium can get through a few other ions, and then electrons and hydrogen. So first of all, in terms of why is it called an exclusion zone? Because the middle bit excludes, and that means if we've got plenty of water all over our cells, over our gut lining, things can't get in. So that would be things like heavy metals, nasty toxins, other things that in the environment that may want to get in. If we've got lots of exclusion zone water, it's like having a barrier or a gate. So that's why that's the sort of exclusion aspect. So again, when people talk about heavy metals and toxins and other varieties of things in the body that shouldn't be there, if you've got lots and lots of exclusion zone water, it can't get into you anyway, so it'll just come out by itself rather than having to do complicated, expensive detox protocols for different things, whether it be parasites or heavy metals. Because I've just found people have hurt themselves more doing these protocols, whereas if they built more water, which there are lots of ways we can do it, we've already discussed diet and light, you can build this exclusion zone which will push out stuff that probably shouldn't be in the cell anyway, and then it stops things getting in the first place. So that's kind of a simple term, layman's terms of talking about this fourth phase of water, not as a battery anymore, but like a barrier. And that's why it's called exclusion zone. Then other people give it different names like coherent water or living water, and they're more describing the fact it's carrying energy and information, because as soon as the water starts to take on shapes or microgeometries, now it can carry information. But that sort of, again, as we were saying right at the beginning, the reason people think water's woo-woo is because it's actually really complicated and we don't fully understand the water physics or the water quantum mechanics fully. And even if I did or you did, it's so complicated we wouldn't be able to explain it to lay people, because you need equations and maths and stuff like that. So we have to just kind of base it on what we know and then what actually works sort of in real life.
Is it structured water? Is that the same as easy water?
I would say structured water is stuff that's in between exclusion zone gel water, because that forms when there's a hydrophilic surface. Like we can think about the easy water being inside our bodies, whereas the structured water, if we think about water that's been heavily treated, it's had all of its structure removed because it's been bashed around in pipes and it's been treated with X, Y, and Z. These microgeometries that we'd find naturally in well water or rivers or vortex water, these microgeometries then sort of form. So structured water is something that we need to mineralize clean water that's been distilled or RO'd. We add minerals in, shine light in, and then these microstructures or geometries will form, and they can carry energy and information. So it's just about not making some kind of magic thing, structured water. We're just returning the water to how it would have been if we had access to a spring in our backyard, which we don't, or most people don't. So it's just making something how it would have been naturally, not this sort of advanced. So the structured water is sort of in between, because easy water is very structured and organized. It organizes itself into hexagonal structures and pops out an electron, and then that can conduct sort of electricity as well, whereas the structured water is the one where it can carry information. So stuff like intention, our ancestors used every single, I wouldn't say religion, or every single practice of some kind of spirituality always used water, and they used to put affirmations into it or wishes or whatever. So this idea that water can carry energy and information has been going on for a long time. And again, if people don't want to embrace that or believe in it, I'm totally fine with that. Just don't do it. So that's where the structured water, I could see how people could see that as woo-woo, but it's one of these things, why not just try making it yourself and then putting your affirmations or whatever you want to do into the water. Look up Veda Austin, who actually has got sort of images and structures and pictures of, you know, all sorts of things. And then maybe rather than just criticizing it, look into it and just make some or try it yourself. But I think looping right back to the beginning of the conversation, those kind of things explained in the wrong way by the wrong person could make people think, oh, this is woo-woo, especially if somebody's trying to sell something on the back of it. And that's, I think, one of the big things about water and nonsense is, like I said right at the beginning, it's got the potential for lots of snake oilery, and then it turns people off. But you can make your own structured water for free with correct remineralization, some sunlight, and then, you know, if you're into mindset and goal setting and affirmations and spirituality, you can put your own, whatever it might be, into your water and then drink it, and it's all free.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm an advanced personal trainer, and back in my 40s, I trained people that got to the Olympics, and mindset is absolutely, key, and focusing and visualization. So that's not woo-woo. That you can see athletes doing it now. They are thinking, right, I can see myself running, I see myself jumping, whatever. But anyway, I won't get too deep.
Oh, no, I think it's really interesting because there's loads of studies on it, like the cybernetics from the surgeon, I think Maxwell, who did plastic surgery on people. And sometimes he'd get them to imagine themselves really attractive, and then for 3 weeks, and they didn't want the surgery after all. And then he'd sometimes do plastic surgery on people and they still thought their nose was big or their bottom was horrible because their mind hadn't been trained. But then I get lots of people who say, oh, this is all nonsense. So they'll basically go and sit on the cushion and manifest their goal for 15 minutes, and then for the next all throughout the day, they're worrying, oh no, what if I can't do this in business? What if I fail? And they've already had hours and hours of negative thoughts of projecting it into there's all different ways we can look at it. And they all say, oh, well, I did my 15 minutes of manifestation to win this or have this size business. But they don't forget that we forget that throughout the day, we're always putting things into, some people would call it the astral realm, or some people would call it the energy field. So I think there's massive truth to it, hugely. And, the power of belief and the power of the placebo are massive as well. The placebo could be 50% sometimes for things. And like you say, being a coach, working with people who want to adopt a quantum lifestyle or change their ways of eating, they have to do it themselves. I can't do it for them. I can't prescribe a quantum pill or a keto tablet. They've got to actually put time and effort in. So again, time is currency, I think. And in order to be able to do that, you actually have to have the right mindset. And then I find things really start to snowball. Like if people get a few little wins, that can explode into a medium win, which can then go into a huge win. So if you've worked with athletes, and I know you're really experienced at what you do, you must have seen sort of every level of motivation versus lack of motivation. And then I'm very much into the mindset too. I just think you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you won't do anything, it's useless.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the thought experiments I give to people that I'm coaching that don't really believe it, I say, well, look, you do believe it, and I'm going to prove you believe it. Imagine twins coming in to see me, and they are going to race and do a 100-meter sprint. And you've got to bet on one of them. And one of the twins says, do you know what, coach? I feel great. I'm going to do this. I am absolutely in the mood. And the second twin said, well, I don't know, coach. I don't feel good about this. I think I'm going to be really slow. Who would you put your money on?
Yeah.
Well, so once you get that proof of concept that mindset definitely has a practical role to play, I'm not going to say, you could say I'm never going to have cancer or anything, but you take it to a degree where, a positive mindset will help. Now, I'm pushed for time, but I want to ask you about something that I've heard you say a few times, and I think it's one of those things that I find interesting. The other thing I am is a qualified phlebotomist, and I've been interested in blood flow for many, many years. I've got thousands of private blood tests, and Exclusion Zone water actually sort of explains the flow of blood in some aspects. Now, you've said the heart is not a pump. It's something I've thought about quite a bit when I was being trained about this, because it doesn't seem big enough to actually pump that amount of blood around, get it up your leg against gravity and all those sort of things. So could you explain what you mean when you say the heart is not a pump?
Okay, so you've gone for the very easy one, which that's enough to sell my mum. If you say, okay, the heart weighs 500 grams and we've got something like 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body, so that's trying to pump twice around the earth. Even my mum would think, oh, actually, that's not big enough. And then sort of more deeply into how the heart works. And because there's lots of images and videos of hearts pumping, the aortic arch folds inwards when the heart pumps. And if it was pushing outward, it's like if you push water through a hose, it goes straight. Whereas what's happening when the heart water comes out of, or blood comes out of the heart, the aortic arch goes the other way. So something must be sucking. And then when it comes to actually the mechanics of how the heart pushes, it's not just doing laminar flow and pushing it in a straight line. The way it contracts, and people have seen this before, it's a vortex. So it's spinning the blood, which is full of water and iron, which is magnetic. So it's creating this magnetic field in the body, which nobody disputes is not there. I mean, we all have measured it and things like that. And then the way in which blood actually sort of flows. The other really important thing about the blood is it's not runny, like, it looks runny when it comes out, but it's actually full of things that are meant to be floating in it. And they're all meant to float sort of separate from each other and away from the blood vessel. So this is where we get back to the exclusion zone water again, that if exclusion zone water forms on the surface of the blood vessel, we are now going to have a load of negative charge on the blood vessel, and then we're going to have a load of positive charges pushed into the blood. And we've also got the red blood cells themselves that are negatively charged. So these don't want to be near each other. So we have this idea, we've created a potential difference because now we've got a difference in charge. And then we've got charges and things that want to repel each other. So the blood effectively is just going to start moving by itself based on electrostatics. And it's one of these things, it's easier to explain with a picture, but it's like the blood's got the capacity to move itself. If we then zoom into blood cells, what happens with them is they can get down a capillary that's smaller than them. So they've basically got to change shape and get pushed down a really tiny capillary. And that's going to add, it's just impossible for the heart to do that, because how could it? It's so far away. And then if we really did, if it needs something to pump the blood back uphill, we'd need lots and lots of kind of capillaries, hearts in our capillaries to push everything back up. So the other interesting thing the heart does, it, like I said before, it makes a giant electromagnetic field. So it is a giant magnet. Bear in mind the blood's full of water and iron that's magnetic. So there's this idea that magnetism is also going to pull the blood back up to the heart. But also, just to tie back into venous flow and muscles, yes, the venous flow is real as well. That's like a little sort of helping hand to push everything back up, because sure, we all know about varicose veins and things like that. So collectively, all of that is how the heart works. And it's impossible that it's a pump. It's more like a hydraulic ram that sucks and then makes a vortex. The blood moves itself with a bit of help to get back home again from the heart being a magnet, and then the veins pushing. And I think, again, for people who are curious, because the people have got very curious since the incident a couple of years ago about questioning everything. And if your cardiologist or doctor tries to tell you the heart's a pump, they clearly don't really understand what's going on, really. And it's the kind of thought experiment that you can do yourself. And some people have just never thought of this before. But then if you go and look further into people like Dr. Tom Cowan or Stephen Hussey, who've written books on this, you can see pictures and you can think for yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest, we were talking about people being told fibs, that the heart being a pump is a huge fib. And it's like you were saying right at the beginning, to not just take things as gospel. Even what I'm saying, or, I might be wrong, I might change my mind, I might learn something new, but always to question, and don't feel silly questioning either. And again, don't feel silly being laughed at.
Yeah, I think there's too many scientists in the past that have, firstly not published until they've died because they're scared of repercussions, in the 16th century, those sort of things, and Galileo being laughed at and being proven right, and the first surgeon that said we should wash our hands, and he was ostracized for daring to say that might be a good thing to do. I'm going to finish with a very basic question, because it is, again, something I've seen you mention a couple of times, but you've never been asked to elucidate on it. So what are proton wires?
That's sort of more information where hydrogen is the, instead of electrons carrying information and energy, because they all electrons are identical until you shine light on them. and then they all become different because they're carrying different amounts of energy. Whereas hydrogen or protons don't really interact with the light. Well, they don't in that way. So it's just an additional means of passing information through the body. And just interestingly, the right amount of iodine helps to stabilize these proton wires. And people know that iodine, yes, it's important for the thyroid, but it's important for energy status too. So it's basically just another highway in the communication sort of network in the body that's not electrons. It's a different molecule.
Yeah, and I wonder if the hydrogen plays such a big role because it's the only one with the valence shell that has just the single electron and all that. I think hydrogen is a fascinating thing to talk about. But anyway, we've run out of time.
True. Exactly, because the hydrogen, its electron is going to carry information, but itself, because again, the sun is just mostly hydrogen, so it's a separate sort of entity in itself. But I think it's like maybe for another time. Yes. Not to ever forget about the hydrogen. The sun, just to close off, it is a gigantic ball of hydrogen.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Sara, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Even though it might look like we started in a big rush, we basically arranged this at massively short notice, and a million things have gone wrong with my computer today, but luckily I fixed it all just in time. So, the universe wanted this to happen.
Thank you so much. I wanted it to happen as well.
Oh, yeah, we did. Yes, it was great fun.